I have good news followed by more gooder news.
Yeah.
So, two things. Take out your notes. We got to do a little. We got to finish up where we're at. But also take out that packet and open it up to page 3. I'm just going to kind of walk through it. I'm going to give you a little credit for doing it. Not a big deal. Page 3 from the video we watched on Friday. And this is third period, in case you weren't certain. Okay. Derek got a 19. And something else is going to tell you.
Is that Derek?
Should we do short ID?
No. We should.
Oh, I got to type those in. I'll get your short IDs back to you tomorrow from Defense of Slavery. Oh, we're going to do something today. We're doing something today. No, we try to do a brainstorm list, but we're going to do something else instead. And did we get to here? Where do we finish in here?
Underground Railroad.
Underground Railroad. Okay. So we got the Underground Railroad. Oh, what was the worst part of all the horrific things about slavery? What was the worst thing? Yeah, that no lack of free will. What was a way to fight back, act submissive, and then do what? Yeah, break stuff. And what did they call? You were talking about stereotypes and names. What was a name given to a slave? And the slave person who now is acting submissive. A cuffy or a horrific names. We talked about the other one of supposedly uncivilized. But I said, this is weird. Is this working? No. I know. I'm just looking at my transcript. Okay, so Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth both worked on the Underground Railroad. Sojourner Truth was more of a fighter for equal rights, too, but so Harriet Tubman would be known as Moses. She would go on 13 times down to the South. She had a price on her head, and this is a stylized picture of her helping guide people on the kind of informal group of guides to safe houses, trying to get to water on the way up on the Underground Railroad. But I love this one because she ran away. She stole herself like Frederick Douglass. And here, rewards, that's Harriet Tubman, Minty. Age 27, chestnut color. That meant of European and African descent. Fine looking and about 5 feet tall. And it just shows you that hard to find a tougher person than Harriet Tubman. So height, whatever, doesn't matter. And I like that picture. She would also be a spy for the Union Army and actually lead a raid in up the Santee River in South Carolina during the Civil War, because she knew where to go where to attack. Basically, it was a raid to on a couple plantations up the river, and so a pretty amazing person. And so, let me tell you really quick about the South. I'll just tell you really quick. This is a church in Savannah that was built by slaves. It's still there. If you ever get a chance to Savannah, one of my favorite towns in the United States, Savannah, Georgia, go visit this church. They need the money from people who go there. And so you pay a little fee, you get a great tour. And this church was built it's about 3/4 of a mile from the river. And the river, Savannah River is this massive, wide river. It's still one of the biggest shipping ports in the world. And this was also a safe house for the Underground Railroad. And so slaves who were running away would be sheltered inside the church, risking a lot. And on the floor of the church were these patterns, and some were obviously Christian, some were not. More patterns they might remember from Africa, what they might remember, little bits being told from their parents. And they would drill these holes in. And people would come in, the sheriff or their masters, whatever, and see these holes in the floor and not think much of them. Or thought, oh, they're so silly. Why would they put holes in the floor? Why would they put holes in the floor? Yeah, it's safe. They have a little, it's a false floor. And there's a 4-foot high little bottom where people could hide. And you can go in there, but it's not very pleasant. I peeked in there and there's cobwebs and everything. But when a ship is there at the harbor, there's a 3-foot by 3-foot wide tunnel So tiny little tunnel that they would crawl 3/4 of a mile underground through this tunnel to go to the harbor to be smuggled out on board a ship. And that shows their determination, courage to escape. Yeah, if you get a chance, go. Church is really neat, and they're so nice. And most people go to Savannah; they don't go for that reason, especially. Yeah, they were really nice. It's really cool. I highly recommend it. And so, last little bit of slave resistance. We have to get to the slave rebellions. There were very few in the United States, even though that fear was always there. Wherever there's slavery, there's going to be slave rebellions, and there's no prisoners taken. Slaves know how they're going to be treated, so they're going to be tortured to death if they rebel and are caught. But so there's the percentage of slaves was always pretty low in American states. Remember, only 2 states at the beginning of the Civil War had a greater percentage of slaves than non-slaves: South Carolina and Mississippi. And also there's always a militia system. But slaves are, if they rebel, they will be tortured to death. So one of the more famous examples of a slave rebellion in history, and everyone knew this. And so there's constantly insurrections. They call them servile rebellions, slave rebellions in the Roman Empire. And the Spartacus rebellion, when that was put down by the Romans along the Appian Way, one of the Roman roads, for over 200 miles, every 10 feet was a slave crucified along the road. And they would leave their bodies up for over 100 years. Everybody knew what's going to happen to slaves. So when they rebel, this is a big, massive, terrifying step. There were more rebellions in the Caribbean and in Brazil because of the greater percentage of slaves. There were a couple slave kingdoms. In Brazil, slaves ran away into the jungle and rebelled and then escaped. And Brazil was so vast they could hide. Same thing, Belize was a little bit like that. There are 3 rebellions in the United States we have to know. Well, 3 for this. There are others, but we're just going to get the 3. New Orleans in 1811, enslaved people would rebel partially when they heard they were part of the United States. I know that's 8 years after the Louisiana Purchase, but they rebelled thinking they heard about this land of the free, a place of liberty. And so here's a picture. This was actually done during after the Civil War, or after the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery in the United States. So to talk about slaves fighting for freedom, but the slaves were carrying American flags, assuming that this new thing, they weren't quite sure what it was, but the United States would help them to be free. So that makes it a tragedy even worse. And they would start in plantations northwest of New Orleans, which is here, and march from plantation to plantation, but household slaves told. Militia would come, capture them, and kill hundreds. And there is a very amazing, it's a moving memorial right along the river right here. I'll show you a picture of it. Because what they did, if you remember I told you about Spartacus, they took pikes, so long poles sharpened at the end, about 14, 15 foot high, and beheaded hundreds of the slaves and put the heads on the pikes, which would be there for years, to terrify any other slaves. So remember that I told you, this whole thing operated under terror and coercion. Denmark Vesey was a free man in South Carolina, an itinerant preacher, meaning he wasn't a member of a specific church. So itinerant means or a lay preacher. But they would have, it was a weird contradiction of slavery because they were worried about assembly, but part of the way they controlled it was through religion. So they allowed slaves to go to church. And there's always a belief that maybe they're organizing something. And a household slave of the governor of South Carolina said that Denmark Vesey was organizing a rebellion. He would be arrested and executed. We do not know if he actually was doing this or this was an exaggeration. South Carolina was on this constant panic about slave rebellions. So we don't know about Denmark Vesey. But the one we have to know, oh, that's the rebellion. That's it. That's the monument for it. And so they did sculptures of heads and put them on pikes. And it's, if you get a chance, go to New Orleans. New Orleans is really cool. It's kind of weird and out of the way to get there, but I would highly recommend going. It's a wow monument. He did a good job. So 1831, Nat Turner. Nat Turner was educated, another lay preacher. There are a lot of slaves that are educated. They could do the books, they could read, they could teach the children. But there's also might read information that might encourage them to rebel, like the Declaration of Independence. And their plan was, here's them plotting it. They would rise up, go plantation to plantation, freeing the slaves, and they knew they couldn't leave the masters of families and the overseers alive because they would be told off. There's no prisoners taking these horrific things. 55 would be whites would be killed. A household slave in one of the plantations ran away, warned the local constable, sheriff. Here's a picture of the militia coming, or a drawing of it, and eventually they would ride through and kill over 100 enslaved people, anybody they could find. 56 would be tried and executed. And that should tell you all the contradictions of slavery. If slaves are property and therefore not truly citizens, why would you have a trial? They had a trial. They tried them for treason and insurrection. If you have a trial, then aren't they? Yeah, do you see the contradictions in this? They wanted a show trial so they could bring Nat Turner and the others up. Nat Turner survived. He hid for a while. He hid for a couple months, and then they finally captured him. Somebody turned him in. They wanted a show trial, and he would be hanged. Yes? They could get money, or maybe they're hoping they get better treatment. I'm one of you, so. But there could be reward. And you have this weird situation that sometimes on the plantations or even families with 1 or 2 slaves, they would let the slaves on their own, if they got their quota done, to work and raise money. So that could actually happen. I know that seems weird, but it shows you all the weird contradictions of slavery. Well, out of this are going to have new kinds of slave codes called the Nat Turner laws. How do I change this? Well, the Nat Turner laws. Just imagine I change this. And Nat Turner laws are slave codes. So write down slave codes. And these are going to be strengthening the existing slave codes. So, for example, every slave had to wear a tag. Not every slave, I'm sorry. Every person, literally, this was it. If you had darker colored skin, you had to wear a tag to show that you're either free or slave. And if you weren't wearing a tag, the assumption was you're a runaway slave. So if you had darker colored skin, that could be anybody with darker colored skin, because skin colors vary. You had to wear this tag. And some of these tags, I'll show you the tags in just a second. It limited education. Not banned education, but limited education for slaves, because they might read abolitionist material. It banned their right to assemble, but they still have the issue of churches. Militia, strengthened the militia. They censored the mail, so no abolitionist material. And I've told you about the gag rule before, that gag rule that banned to talk about slavery. All of this came after Nat Turner. And here is trying to attack the abolitionists trying to spread their material to slaves. And this is this in Virginia where it happened. Here is a couple of the tags. So a field hand. This is a pretty horrific one, but this is one in the museum in South Carolina. A term for this in the 20th century through today would be an internal passport. Basically, you have to show your ID to certain people all the time. And so everybody of darker colored skin, and then we just decide, yeah, your skin's too dark, you have to wear a tag. I mean, literally, it was like that. You have to show this tag, or you could be, you would be arrested and accused of being a runaway slave. And that's really scary for anybody north to go south, because why would you have a tag? Yeah.
What did like slavery in the North? Did they? Like, I'm just what?
There were some slaves in the North, but a lot of free African Americans in the North. But New Jersey, a couple places in New York and Illinois still had slaves, so they were still owned by somebody else. but it was a little bit more precarious because they didn't have the slave codes. And so they had to, by definition, treat them better because it'd be easier for them to run away. So there were still slaves in New Jersey up until literally the 13th Amendment in 1865. And so these are the Nat Turner laws. This would really affect the South. And it's no coincidence you have censorship of the male the same year as Nat Turner's law. So the Southerners blame the growth of abolitionism in the North. Now let's be clear. Despite the positive good theory, slaves were abolitionists. If you're an enslaved person, you believe that slavery should go. But William Lloyd Garrison, we saw him in the movie, the video on Friday. He would start the Liberator in 1831, the same year as Nat Turner. Frederick Douglass would get his start a little bit later. So we saw him in the video, ran away to freedom with help of admirers and the sale of his book, his autobiography. He bought his own freedom and he escaped slavery. He would become one of the most dynamic leaders, not just for freedom, but for civil rights. He would start a newspaper called the North Star. I love the illusion. North Star. You're running away to freedom. Follow the North Star. It's a great illusion. And I really like that. It's, because Frederick Douglass is pretty amazing. And his fight was not just for freedom. It wasn't enough for slaves to be free. They need to have equal rights under the Constitution. And most people thought that was ridiculous, including a significant number of abolitionists. And he also understood one more thing. He understood the history of it and what he saw. So he knew about the issue of, remember Bacon's Rebellion, and you have all the poor, the lower class, regardless of color of skin, slave, indentured servant, they all rose up against the House of Burgesses. And they passed the slave codes that begin to divide people by color. And so you have members of this lower class, the vast majority of people, now fighting over color of skin. He understood that racism comes from class. It was the upper class trying to control the lower class. And remember I told you about the status. Poor whites don't have much, but they have the status of being white. He understood that. Did he have a solution? That's a tough one, but he understood that. He was unique at this time because most abolitionists. Oh, one more thing. What was the name of the Women's Rights Convention in 1848? Yeah, Seneca Falls. He was there. He was there. He believed in equality for all. What a remarkable man. And after the Civil War, he would continue to fight and had such high hopes for Reconstruction that would be dashed. And so abolitionists believe slavery is immoral and must end. They agreed on this. Where the disagreement came, a significant number of abolitionists said slavery is horrible, but they're not equal. They didn't believe in equality. And many abolitionists wanted to get rid of slavery so they could get rid of the former slaves and create their dream of a white republic. Remember we talked about this with post-Native emancipation and free soilers. A lot believe this. So for example, even before Nat Turner, the American Colonization Society was created back in the 1820s. And the thought was they would raise money, hoping someday the federal government would do this, raise money to free enslaved people and then ship them to Africa. Now, virtually all enslaved people in the United States, especially by 1840, 1850, were born in the United States. But the idea is we'll ship them back to Africa. They weren't born here. And so this is a poster advertising it, freedom in Africa. And they would try to convince free people in the North, those who had escaped slavery or were free, to go to Africa too. Here is in the capital city, they created this new country after it was started during the 1820s. So James Monroe was president. Monrovia. Here's money for the American Colonization Society for this new country they created, Monrovia. Anybody know the country they created? Liberia, for liberty. They actually tried to create two, Liberia and Maryland. I know, Maryland, but Liberia survived. So when the World War I began, for example, in 1914, there were only two countries in all of Africa that were not taken over by Europe, by European powers, Liberia and Ethiopia. Everybody else had been taken over after Liberia was created, ironically. Here's Liberia right there. It's still ravaged by civil war because they immediately had class differences there between the Africans who already lived there and the people coming in to take their land who were former enslaved people from the United States. And to this day, Liberia has been ravaged by a horrific civil war. So it didn't really solve the problem. They just threw people in Liberia. This was still talked about by a lot of people into the Civil War. Those who were opposed to slavery. Let's get rid of slavery, then ship them to Africa. One person who was still convinced that this was a good idea was the President of the United States during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln. Till about 1863, he still thought this would be a good idea. I can't even wrap my mind around the idea of shipping 400 million or 4 million people across the Atlantic Ocean, but that's what they were talking about. Oh, that guy looks important. It's not my attention. Why him? I just think it's great. Technically, thank you for your attention. That could only mean one thing. We talked a lot about justifying slavery, right? Ways to justify slavery. We talked about that in class, right? Wouldn't it be wonderful to do something cool? Like write a thesis statement. What do you mean? Why are you whining? Okay, write a thesis statement. Now, take a couple seconds. Think about we talked about all those things that justify slavery. Heck, there's this awful man from South Carolina came up with a philosophy. Went through a lot of reasons to justify it. And then, get the main point. Remember that why, something that tied together. If you can think of something definite, that's great. If not, think in terms of social, political, economic, cultural, foreign affairs. And while you do that, everybody put this out on page 3, just so I can roughly just kind of check. All right? Not a big deal. And I'll just walk through. Not a big deal. I'm just said I'd give you a little bit of credit for it because I'm good people. I'm not turning this in. This is just a little thing of practice. Okay, and make sure you have an A, B, or C. And if you can't think of something very specific to tie it all together for the Y, it's social, political, economic, works. A, B, and C. There's one really big one they use to justify slavery. It's really big. It's kind of a big deal. Africa. But you can say just the social and economic. Okay, when you're done, go ahead and go talk to your neighbor, converse, enjoy. Talk really quick about it. Any luck?
I don't know.
Well, those are good rechargeable batteries. No, I was worried they wouldn't be. I was worried they wouldn't be. This is going to be exciting. We're filming this. This is going to be really exciting. Okay, when you're done with your eight, I gave you a bunch of reasons to justify slavery.
So why?
The only way you go that
I don't know what I wrote, but I see slaveholders
if you want to have a couple of
all this fail, not
okay, you got very good. And it's also cultural that ties everything together. It's good. How do we do? Was that a fun one? That's so much fun talking about that. Okay. So, did anybody read one that was so good? It's just life-changing that you want to volunteer. Now you know you're scared because if you volunteer somebody, I might call you.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. Yeah. Now everyone's scared. Go ahead. Tam, please read.
Mine is not good. I missed
For real? Oh yeah. This is real. Okay.
Yeah.
You want to read yours?
Not really.
Give it a try.
Slaveholders in the southern United States justify the systems they claim that slaves were genetically inferior to civilized
It's good. And the dehumanizing that ties everything together. But what word could you have used instead of dehumanizing? Racist. But it works. It works exactly fine. It works. That's the only thing I would have said that's different. But you could do other things too. Yeah.
Said the methods for justifying slavery were cultural, as shown in the positive good theory, the introduction of racism, and the fears generated from slave mentality.
Good. 3 paragraphs. Cultural ties things together. Yeah, that works. Good. So 2 good ones so far.
And now I know what to do about this.
Does anyone on this side want to read theirs? No. Want to read yours again? Because yours was good.
Slaveholders use social ideologies
Good. 3 points. The Y ties everything together by cultural changes. Do you want to see mine? It's very basic. Yeah, you also put economic benefits because they don't want to get in. They're making money, people. And you could have put down also fear of slave rebellion or fear of what might happen if they're freed. You know, that's those kind of things. That was big. And let's say there's another one, and that's close to that's. See? So here's my Y. Here's my Y. A, B, C. Y, A, B, C. Sound good? All right. Should we just write it?
Yeah.
Put another practice tomorrow. This would actually be another good one to get. Good essay question if we have to do an essay question, which you guys do. Let's start in the fiery 50s. And by the way, what color is fire? Red. Look at that one. Did you see that?
Wow.
Yeah. A dumb one that's actually a painting?
Yeah.
No, you have to write it. Yeah. Everybody, we're going to do a painting next. Bring oil paint, and I want texture.
Usually the second document is some sort of image.
There might be political cartoons. Yeah. Huh? I like political cartoons. Yeah. Oh, but all right, fiery 50s, and that's John Brown. So let's. Yeah, well, it's still sticking with this, you know, the kind of manifest destiny, slavery, just kind of a new subunit. Because now we're going to the road to war. It's a big unit. That was separate. Yeah. And so basically we're talking manifest destiny. So these are all the road to civil war. Manifest destiny, slavery, fiery 50s. So the fiery 50s, remember the Mexican Cession? California wanted to come in as a free state. Remember that? Remember the Wilmot Proviso that said no slavery in any territory from the Mexican Cession? All that stuff familiar? What's that? See. It comes from the ceded. So ceded is cession. I know, we think cession. I know, yeah. And so Zachary Taylor was president. No one had any idea what Zachary Taylor wanted. Zachary Taylor really wasn't sure either. As a southern plantation owner, Southerners assumed he would try to get as much of his territory as slave territory as possible. Remember, Southern states, slave states, want to spread slavery so there's more senators to protect slavery. They want more pro-slavery senators. And here's Taylor, and this is one of those that either the negative had some kind of bubble in it, or you should get that checked. Just throwing that out there. But that's Taylor. First, I don't know how much longer he's got. And the problem Taylor was convinced of was slavery in the territories. Remember, I told you that was the problem. That was the trigger of war. These new territories, specifically the Mexican Cession, and slavery in the territories. Hey, it's the same map. So, slavery here. And this is his plan. He came up with a beautiful plan, he thought. Elegant. And he actually befriended northern anti-slavery Whigs, which surprised everybody. And his plan was simple. Let's just skip the territory and make two really big states. And this is him balancing the scales on both sides and that weird picture of him on a scale. Two states. And they would come in with the laws and customs they already have. Meaning, would they be slave states or free states? They would be free. New Mexico and California, California and a massive New Mexico. And they did not have slaves. Remember, Texas banned slavery. Now, some of you might be thinking, did I say Texas? I'm sorry, Mexico banned slavery. Texas was an independent republic. It was already, then it came in as a state. So that's already been decided. It's this. Two big states. Now, what do you suppose? Free states. And Taylor was like, I solved the problem. How can we fight? They're states, they'll come in as free states, whatever. It's already been decided that states decide their own laws, so slavery won't be touched here. No complaint. The South won't mind at all. What was the reaction of the South? Well, let's put it this way. He was going through a minefield. You like that? I don't know where I found that, but it's actually some Japanese game show. And all I gotta say is, I want to watch this game show. Because it's actually the minefield that's going to end in, wait for this one, a nuclear explosion. It's like somebody, that's actually an atomic bomb under the water to see what it would do in an atomic torpedo. Yep. It's amazing. It's amazing we're here. But going back to this, they're a group of new Southern congressmen. Unlike the older ones who were still basically compromisers. And they dubbed them the Fire Eaters. And some of their leaders were Edmund Ruffin of Virginia, who determined to protect slavery at all costs. He would later claim that he fired the first shell, the first cannon against Fort Sumter, starting the Civil War. William Yancey of Alabama, a plantation owner, and determined to basically blow the whole thing up if we can't have a system of slavery the way they want it. And James Mason was not quite as radical, but he allied himself with the Fire Eaters. And all of them were uncompromising in their defense of slavery. So unlike the old compromisers and slaveholders, and that includes like Henry Clay and others, these people, if we give in at all, the North will overwhelm us. So we cannot allow two big free states, because everybody assumed Oregon, the Oregon Territory, would be free too. And the the Missouri Compromise already said this was true. As they saw it, they're going to be surrounded by free areas. The concentration of slaves then will grow bigger and bigger here, condemning them to slave rebellion. So they turned this into, you are threatening to cut our throats in the middle of the night. And going into 1850, they said, not only will we not accept Taylor's plan, but if you push it upon us, that's civil war, secession.
What was Taylor's plan name? Was there a name for it?
No, just Taylor's plan. Or sometimes you might say called, I know this seems weird now considering what's going on in Israel and the West Bank, but the two-state solution. But just Taylor's plan. And Taylor he was almost like a zealot for it. This is my plan, this is the best plan. He's converted to it, he loves it, he will not shift. And so it looked like almost overnight civil war. And then Henry Clay, who is getting much older, stepped in with a series of ideas that eventually would be dubbed the Compromise of 1850. So all the next few things would be leading to this compromise. Now, Henry Clay was not just going to deal with the Mets concession. He thought he could deal with all the problems. He called it the Omnibus Bill. Omnibus Bill means a bill that would deal with solutions to many different issues. Today, they always talk about the big budget bills for government. They literally still call them omnibus bills. So he's not going to just deal with Mexico. He's going to deal with other problems. Henry Clay had that reputation of the great compromiser from the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise tariff during nullification. And so his thought was, in fact, he's thinking very consciously by 1850. I don't have much time left. I'm never going to be president. He tried essentially 4 times. But my legacy will be that I saved the country. That's my legacy. This is one of the last photographs of Henry Clay ever taken. And that is his rusty face, that little wry grin. And so, his compromise was this. It's 5 parts. 5 parts. The first one, California Free State. The second one, do not write this down because this will change. So leave this blank. We will come back to it. Leave it blank. Slavery abolished in District of Columbia. And so these are 2 big things for free soil and abolitionists. The idea of slavery in the in the capital of a nation based upon freedom and democracy was abhorrent to those who thought slavery was immoral. You can imagine how Southerners felt about these two. Next, New Mexico and Utah would have popular sovereignty. So down the road, they would decide slave or free in these two massive new territories. That meant it would be, now I put the question mark is, the question was, and the answer is yes, they would be open to slavery. Because if you're going to allow for them to vote down the road, that means slaveholders have to come in. Tough fugitive slave laws to return slaves who escaped to the north, especially New England. And the law said all citizens, meaning adult males at this time, must assist in returning runaway slaves. They must join a group temporarily deputized to run down somebody who broke the law, called a posse. And lastly, the Texas border was still unclear, and the Republic of Texas issued a bunch of bonds. They had a bunch of debt, and the Republic of Texas is gone, yet there's still Americans with this bonds. And so they'll resolve the border and pay back its old debt. The South wanted these two especially, and to a lesser degree that. And Henry Clay's idea was both sides have to give. That would be the compromise. Both sides give something. And you notice it tried to solve a bunch of problems. Slave owners were complaining always about their enslaved people running away to freedom and northern states not helping. So here is a picture. This is a really famous one of Clay presenting it and talking to the Senate. And the Senate chambers back then were tiny, not much bigger than this room. Remember, when the Capitol was built, there weren't that many states. They're just about to break ground on building the new Senate and House chambers that still exist to this day. They just expanded the Capitol on both sides. And they're about ready to tear down the old rotunda and build the current one. But here's a compromise of the actual issue going on here, a fight between all the senators over this issue, and someone brought a gun, which would become very common. Because the thing was, that spring of 1850, Clay's compromise did not pass. It failed. And Clay, the great compromiser, refused to change any of his laws, thinking this is the only thing that will save the country, and only I can save the country. Did you get that? It didn't pass. And Clay was absolutely crushed. He went back to Kentucky that end of that spring, convinced not only that he failed to pass this law, but the country was doomed. The nation won't survive the year, and his life had been in vain. He was absolutely crushed by this. And he never really recovered. Oh, here is the Clay Compromise and mocking this. It's a really creepy picture, but that represents slavery. So they're holding it, and Clay's compromise is to cut it in half, meaning potentially kill the whole thing. Yeah, cartoons back then were pretty gruesome. And remember I told you Clay went back absolutely crushed? He didn't have long to live. That is his death mask. So before photography, what they would do is you want to remember your loved ones. And if you could afford it, they would put plaster over the face. Sometimes they do live masks, so they'd still be alive and make a copy of the face. But here they put a plaster cast and then made a cast and then made a model of their face. And he still has that smile. All the way, like he knew something. Henry Clay doesn't have much longer to live. Daniel Webster, another incredibly powerful Whig from Massachusetts, he got up and gave a speech for Clay's compromise. And with his deep, booming, baritone voice that everyone came to listen to, he said, we got to ignore our states. We got to ignore our section. The only way to save America is to vote for Clay's compromise. Now, we can disagree about his solution, but that's what he's saying. But it didn't work. The compromise still did not pass. And Webster had a little bit more than a year left. Before I show you that picture, doesn't he look like an angry owl? You don't need to know the speech, just know that Webster came out and spoke for it. Because Daniel Webster, another one of the old giants who was there to compromise, that's his death notes. He has less than a year after that. One more man got up and gave a speech opposed to it. In fact, he was so ill, he had to be brought out on a stretcher, and Mason actually read his speech. Anybody know who that one was? John C. Calhoun. Huh?
I'm so ready for him to die. I'm so excited.
And his speech was, the only way to save the country are for two presidents. Two presidents, each with a veto. So they could, northern president and the southern president. Meaning, what would ever get done? It'd be like today. Nothing would ever get done. And therefore save the country. Obviously, that didn't pass. And Calhoun, and we all know it. Yeah, that's kind of creepy, isn't it? You like that? He doesn't have long either. Now, before you go, I want you to wait, just listen. Imagine a dark and stormy night. You're trying to sleep, a fitful night's sleep. There's lightning flashing. It's dark. You wake, but you're tired. You're basically asleep, and all of a sudden, you wake up with a start, knowing there's a presence. You open your eyes, and you see that.
Oh,
Their hair is gone.
What happens to their hair?
Well, because it's hard to do a mask with the hair, so they would just smooth it. Sometimes they would try to carve in the hair.
When you need to grow.
Yes, he died, or did he?
No, he's
John C. Calhoun gonna make a president in 1890.
I don't know. I don't know.
Did John C. Calhoun John C. Calhoun criminal conquest? John C.